Adding a main player. In this tutorial, we'll learn adding a player using image sprite resource, setting the player attributes properties, setting the player collision configuration, making player sprite have an animation, making the player you can control. Adding the player sprite resource. We will create a new object by extending the default me.sprite to create our player. We will use the provided simple sprite sheet to set how it looks. The image in PNG sequences format useful to us in making an animation of our character and defining a basic walking and standing animation. It's of course possible to define more complex animations for the same entity. For example, jumping, crouching, hurting, and etc. But let's keep things simple for now. We'll only make our player looks as it is and name it as minor. And here is the step-by-step to make animation for our player. First, click Add button on the selected image. For the first animation costume, select this image item until it added into animation stage. After done, name it idle. For the second costume, select this image item and make this animation structure. After done, name it walking. Set the player attributes properties. There are some parameters to pass a standard parameter. Setting object here above used by the renderable panel of player. Now, you can either specify these files here in editor screen or directly in your Blockly code. And here is the detail of this attribute that it must have. Because you must activate the hasBody variable, so the physics tab will appear too, and set it like this. Set the player collision configuration. The next step is to define the collision player. For the simple illustration, collision is the entity attributes as an object type of your player. To add collision into your object player, you only need to drag one of basic shape form that is most ideal with your player image. The collision effect will apply automatically to your player. Set the collision type. Collision type is the basic status of your player object. What is the main player that you can control, or if it's an enemy, the obstacles, etc. To set the collision types, you only need to click the collision combo list from the collision properties. Set the player collision mask. The next step is to define the collision mask. For a simple illustration, collision mask is the rule batch of object written about what it will be happened if it collide with the object. For example, what will happen if the player object is collide with the enemy object? To configure the collision mask of your object player, you only need to tick or untick the object array list from the collision properties. You can check more than one object type or as many as you need it. And in this case, it means our player will get a reaction if it collides with all objects that exist in the game stage. You can set the default animation that will firstly appears when the game is running by pressing the default button until the button color indicates change into blue. So, choose the default animation clip to idle like this. If you create the wrong animation or some animation won't be used anymore, you can delete it by pressing directly on the image item like this. Control the player. And for the last step, we will try to make the player object that can be controlled by us. In this tutorial, we will try to give a code by using the Blockly, not Melon editor code. But before that, because this is the tutorial for the beginner Blockly, to make it easier on the player controller, we will use the platformer plugin Blockly that can be activated by clicking Project, Preferences, then checking Platformer Controller. After that, click Apply. Then, Explanation. For this case, we try to make the game in platformer format. So, we'll use the platformer plugins blockly. All the plugins blockly set up in the init block. You can try to make the structure like the image here. Set me.collision.types.player object to value true. Set the collision types of player as the player object. Name it idle. Set the player animation that would play. Platformer plugin set control key, left, right, jump, down key is the platformer plugins blockly that used to control the player. Platformers plugin init object controller is used to set up the player behavior about gravity, speed movement, jumping, and friction. Platformer plugins when moved to the right and left is used to make the player to move left and right including the changeable of the player animation. Platformer plugin set double jump is used to enable the player to play twice. Platformer plugins player update in update event block will update the changeable of players' controls every second. This set current animation walk in the on-activated event will make the player playing walk animation when an event happened. This set current animation idle in on the activate event will make the player back playing idle animation when non-event text. Platformer plugins and object controller is the plugins blockly that unbind all the platformer blockly if the game is no more playing. After done, back to level 1 pen, then add or drag the player object to the stage and place it here. Then you can run the game.